Hi, my name's Jacintha, and a few weeks ago, I found out my husband was secretly filing for divorce behind my back. But that wasn't even the worst part. He'd been moving money, our money, into accounts I didn't even know existed, planning to leave me with nothing, while smiling at me across the dinner table. It started with a whisper in the middle of the night, and what I uncovered after that, it changed everything. What do you do when the person you trusted most makes you a ghost in your own life? Would you stay silent or strike back? I woke up thirsty, the kind of dry-mouth discomfort that won't let you fall back asleep. I didn't check the time. I knew it was late. The kind of late where everything's still except for the things that shouldn't be. Our bedroom was cold. The windows had been cracked open from earlier that day, letting in the spring air that still carried a bite. I reached for my robe, slid my feet into slippers, and padded softly down the hallway, hoping not to wake Declan. But I didn't need to worry about that. He wasn't in bed. As I turned the corner past the living room, a faint light spilled from the kitchen. I slowed my steps, pausing just outside the doorway. I heard his voice. Low, controlled, the way you speak when you don't want to be overheard. "No, she has no idea," he was saying. "It's already filed." My spine stiffened. There was a long silence. Then I heard the sound of his thumb flicking over his phone screen. Another quiet sentence. "Just let the paperwork work for itself." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Declan had never taken calls at night. Not like this. He didn't whisper. He didn't hide. And yet, here he was, speaking as if he was planning something I wasn't supposed to hear. I stayed in place long enough to catch my breath turning shallow, my pulse in my ears. Then I stepped back quietly and slipped into the hallway. By the time I got back to the bedroom, I could hear him coming down the hall behind me. I crawled back under the covers, turned away from the door, and steadied my breathing. The mattress shifted under his weight. I felt the tension in his body for a split second before he let out a relaxed sigh and settled in, as if nothing had happened. I closed my eyes and didn't say a word, but my mind was screaming. Morning came, and Declan got up before I did, just like always. He said he had an early meeting downtown and left without breakfast. I watched him walk out the door like he hadn't planted a bomb the night before. After the door clicked shut, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the same chair where he'd whispered those words. Something about the way he said, "It's already filed," had sat in the back of my brain like a splinter I couldn't ignore. I wasn't stupid. I knew what divorce papers sounded like, even when you dressed them up in legalese. I also knew Declan wasn't just some impulsive husband having second thoughts. He planned everything, his calendar, his investments, even our grocery list. If he'd said it was filed, that meant it wasn't just an idea. It was in motion. I walked back to our bedroom and sat at his desk. Declan kept his personal laptop there, closed but not locked. He never assumed I'd look. And I hadn't, not in all these years. But today was different. The moment I lifted the lid, the screen came to life. No password prompt. His inbox was open. It felt like breaking into a church, sacred but necessary. I didn't search. I just glanced through the tabs. That's when I saw it. A drafted email, never sent, titled "Divorce Filing Strategy." I clicked. My stomach tightened. Inside were bullet points. File in Travis County to limit delays. Begin withdrawal of accounts. Slowly, avoid joint account freeze. Split into temporary subholdings. Schedule mediation after 30 days. Keep her uninformed until filing is confirmed. There was more. Advice from someone named Martin that read like it came from a lawyer who'd done this before. If she challenges you, claim miscommunication. Stay calm. The court likes composed men. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I forwarded the email to myself. Then I deleted the draft from his account and cleared the browser history. I sat there for a minute, staring at my reflection in the black screen. Something inside me fractured, but something else sharpened. The old me would have confronted him that night, asked questions, demanded truth. The version of me that sat there now didn't need answers. She needed a plan. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. He wanted me uninformed. He wanted me off balance. He wanted to outmaneuver me in my own home. But he underestimated the one thing I had over him. I listened. And now, I knew. I didn't sleep much after that night. Even with the bedroom door shut and the windows drawn, I felt exposed, like something sacred had been broken, while I was still pretending to believe in it. By the time the sun came through the blinds, I had already showered, dressed, and made the coffee before Declan stirred. When he walked into the kitchen, he looked refreshed, humming to himself as if he hadn't just detonated a grenade under our marriage. "Morning," he said casually, pouring himself a cup. "You're up early." I smiled, just enough to make it believable. "Couldn't sleep." "Too much on your mind?" I stirred my coffee, watching the way the cream folded in. "Something like that?" He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So listen, I was thinking, it might be smart if we went ahead and combined all our accounts. Just to simplify things, in case something ever happens. Emergencies and stuff." I paused, just for a second. Not long enough to give away anything. Then I nodded slowly. "That's considerate." He smiled, satisfied with himself like a man who believed he was 2 steps ahead. "I can take care of everything. Just need your login for the retirement account and the secondary savings. We'll make a spreadsheet, keep things clean." I watched him sip his coffee, relaxed. He really thought I'd just hand it all over. Declan had always been good at delivering bad news inside good manners. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply made suggestions that weren't really suggestions, decisions disguised as teamwork. "Let me look at a few things first," I said lightly. "Then we can talk through it." "Of course," he replied, as if the outcome was already written. "No rush." He left for the office around 9, after making a call out on the patio. I pretended to read emails at the dining table, but I was listening through the screen door. I couldn't make out every word, just enough. "It's moving." "Yeah, she's not pushing back yet." By 10, he was gone. I moved through the house slowly, intentionally, like I was checking a body for signs of life. Everything was still in place. Our framed vacation photos, his running shoes by the front door, the bills he never paid stacked neatly on the counter. But something about the air felt thinner, as if the house had already started emptying itself of what was real. In the kitchen, I noticed a sheet of paper pinned to the fridge. I hadn't seen it there the day before. At first glance, it looked like a basic printout. Colored blocks, headings, bullet points. But then I saw the title, Q2 Personal Finance Overview. I pulled it down and sat at the table. Declan had listed out every asset, down to our tax deductions. There was a whole section titled Post-Separation Financial Model. The language was polished, strategic. His IRA, projected returns, health premiums, real estate reallocation. There was nothing under joint planning, not even a placeholder. There wasn't a single mention of my name, not in the headers, not in the footnotes, not even in the section marked Household Obligations. Just one quiet erasure, neatly typed in 12-point font. I stared at the paper, fingers pressing into the edges until they curled. This wasn't about filing for divorce anymore. This was about vanishing me from the future he was still planning to benefit from. Quietly, neatly. As if I had been a chapter he could footnote and skip. As if I hadn't sacrificed time, energy, and parts of myself he never even thanked me for. I laid the sheet down and stood up, slow, walked over to the trash, folded the paper twice, dropped it in. Then I walked to my room and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, the one with the documents he never cared to ask about. Birth certificate, college records, employment contracts, a bank account he never knew existed. Funny how men like him think they're the only ones who know how to keep secrets. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I wrote down 2 things on a legal pad. 1. Do not engage. 2. Move before he thinks you can. He'd already started building a life I wasn't supposed to notice until it was too late. But now that I had, I was going to make sure he never forgot it. I folded the paper into my purse and closed the drawer softly, as if the contents inside could hear me thinking. The weight of those documents, things he never cared to ask about, suddenly felt like the only thing anchoring me. The rest of that day moved in slow stretches. I washed the dishes that had piled up. I watered the plants. I answered 2 emails for work, both of which I read twice before replying. Anything to keep my hands busy while my mind sprinted. That night, Declan came home later than usual. Said traffic was a mess on Lamar. He talked about some client who needed him to redo a pitch deck last minute. I nodded, like a good listener, like the woman who didn't know the truth. He went to bed early, exhausted. I lay next to him for an hour, eyes open, heart steady, mind full. By morning, I had a plan. After he left for work, I waited until the front door shut and the garage door rumbled closed behind him. Then I pulled my laptop to the kitchen table. I hadn't looked at our joint accounts in months, maybe longer. Declan always handled that part. He liked being the numbers guy, and I let him. Until now, I logged in. The page loaded slow, like even the internet knew what I was about to see. At first glance, nothing looked wrong. The balance wasn't shockingly low. There weren't any huge red flag withdrawals. But as I clicked into the transaction history, a pattern started to form. A few hundred here, a few hundred there. Not enough to be noticed, but enough to be deliberate. Transfer reserve. Vendor holding fee. 3p allocation. It read like financial static. Codes meant to confuse someone who wasn't supposed to ask questions. But I was asking now. I opened a blank spreadsheet and began to copy each suspicious transaction over. Color-coded, labeled by date, totaled by month. April, flagged to $200, May, $2,450, June, $1,875, July, $3,100. It wasn't the total that got me, it was the regularity, like someone making payments on a plan. Quiet, methodical, premeditated. Then I Googled one of the transaction descriptions, 3p allocation services. The first result was a financial advisory firm based out of Delaware. Shell companies, asset reallocation services, discrete support for personal transitions. I didn't need to read further. He wasn't just filing for divorce, he was funneling resources. It hit me then. I wasn't just being removed from his future. I was being financially ghosted before the ink even hit the paperwork. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I closed the laptop slowly, stood up, and walked to the sink. The morning light had shifted across the countertop, and the silence in the house pressed in from every corner. I leaned against the counter and stared at the toaster, seeing nothing. How many times had I shrugged things off? The Bluetooth calls in the backyard. The networking dinners where he came home without a receipt or a real story. The time he said, "It's just a tax thing," when I glanced at his screen and he closed the tab like it burned. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I didn't want to be that wife. The nag. The overthinker. But that wasn't it. I hadn't looked closer because some part of me, the part that still remembered what he used to be, didn't want it to be true. Now I had no choice but to see. I walked to the garage and sat in the car, phone in hand, not to cry, not to scream, but to think without walls. I pulled out the yellow pad again. Do not engage. Move before he thinks you can. Confirm pattern. Freeze access. I glanced up at the garage shelves, the ones with the bins I packed, the ones he never touched. Inside one was a folder with my personal bank info from back when I managed my own money. I'd closed that account years ago, or so I thought. Turns out, I just stopped using it. But it was still there, still open, still mine. And now, it was going to be my exit hatch. I drove to the credit union just after lunch, parked in the back lot, went inside with a scarf around my shoulders and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. The woman behind the desk looked up, polite. "How can I help you today?" I slid my ID across the counter. I need to reactivate an account and move some money, discreetly. She blinked once, then nodded. Of course, ma'am, let's get started. By the time I left the credit union, the wind had picked up. Not in a stormy way, just enough to remind me things were shifting. I drove home with the windows down, letting the breeze tangle my hair and cool the back of my neck. I didn't turn on music. I needed the quiet to think. The house felt too still when I walked in. I placed my bag on the entry table, kicked off my flats, and made my way to the kitchen. There was a stack of unopened mail near the microwave, credit card offers, lawn service flyers, and one envelope from our bank. I opened it, half thinking it was a statement. It wasn't. Instead, it was a confirmation letter. We received your request to remove Jacintha Greaves from joint checking ending in 82XX. Pending document verification. What request? I didn't send anything. I hadn't authorized a change. My heart didn't race. It went quiet, sharp. I folded the letter, walked straight to my office, and pulled up the voicemail tab on my phone. A call from the bank had come through that morning. I had missed it by 7 minutes. The message was robotic but clear. We're calling to confirm a submitted authorization to remove a party from a shared account. Please contact us immediately to verify. I played the message again, just to be sure. He'd tried to cut me out. Not by yelling, not by fighting, but by signing a few papers and hoping I'd be too late to stop it. I grabbed the house phone, dialed the bank's fraud division, and asked for the account team. 20 minutes later, the account was frozen. A fraud hold was placed, and I'd set alerts for any transaction above $200. I hung up the phone, poured a glass of water, and sat down at the kitchen table. My hands were steady. My breath, even. I wasn't scared. I was past scared. I was reading the manual for a game he thought I didn't know existed. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to water the front plants. Not because they needed it, but because I needed air. I was halfway through misting the hydrangeas when I heard someone call my name. Hey there, Jacintha! It was Mr. Griggs, our neighbor across the street. Retired, chatty, and a bit nosy, but never rude. He waved from his driveway, walking over in his usual tan hat and cargo shorts. Haven't seen you two in a few days, he said. Thought you might be on vacation or moving. Saw the U-Haul here Tuesday. I blinked. U-Haul? He nodded, sipping from his travel mug. Yeah, came around noon. Young guys moved a few things out the garage. Declan said you were clearing space. Said something about early spring cleaning. I felt the world slow, but my face didn't change. Oh, right. I must have missed it. Thanks for letting me know. He smiled and wandered back toward his driveway. I waved and went back inside, closing the front door quietly behind me. I walked to the garage. The overhead light flickered on. I looked at the shelves where we'd kept backup tools, off-season decorations, and old photo bins. The boxes were gone, not all of them, just the ones labeled cables, winter gear, and MISC office. At first glance, it didn't seem like much, but I knew what was in them. Our external hard drives, backup tax files, his old journals, our first photo albums. He was erasing me one bin at a time. I stood in the middle of the space and realized something chilling. He wasn't just moving forward without me. He was trying to make it look like I'd never been part of it. No fight, no closure, just removal. I walked back inside and texted my lawyer, Faye. Need to talk, urgent, property manipulation. She replied 3 minutes later. Free at 6, I'll call. I leaned against the counter and watched the sun start to dip behind the backyard fence. You don't always notice when someone stops making room for you in their life. Sometimes they do it slowly, by moving your boxes, changing your passwords, writing you out of plans they pretend still include you. But once you see it, once it's visible, you can't unsee it. And I had seen enough. After I hung up with Faye that night, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear. Something colder had taken its place. Something more focused. I spent the next day moving silently through the house, not touching much, but scanning everything. It was like realizing the wallpaper you always liked was covering cracks underneath. Hairline fractures that had been growing longer than you dared admit. Around mid-afternoon the next day, while I was rinsing off a plate in the sink, a soft ding echoed from the other side of the kitchen. I turned to see my old iPad light up on the counter. I hadn't used it in over a year, maybe 2. I'd only kept it plugged in for access to old files and some photos I never transferred. But now, somehow, it had received a message. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked it up. The screen was already awake. No name, just a local area code and one message. She thinks everything's normal. The timing's perfect. My throat tightened. I stared at the words, reading them once, then again, slower. The timing's perfect. I didn't need to guess who she was, or who had sent it. Somewhere out there, Declan was talking about me, about this moment. And whoever he was speaking to thought I was still in the dark. I stood motionless, holding the iPad as if it might bite. Then I did what I'd trained myself to do. I took a screenshot, airdropped it to my secure email folder, and powered the device off. No panic, no meltdown. I placed it face down on the table and sat, letting the silence stretch. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something denser, like lead in the chest. They were watching the clock. I opened my laptop and pulled up my documents. For years, Declan had assumed I wasn't interested in the legal side of anything, that I didn't read the fine print, that I didn't remember the difference between an LLC and an S-corp. He forgot I used to brief attorneys on contract risks in my 20s, that I read faster than I spoke, that I might have chosen silence, but I never chose ignorance. The message had cracked something open, and within the hour, I had a call booked with Faye the next day, just in case. Around 4:45, I left the house. I didn't tell anyone, didn't leave a note. I just drove. I didn't know exactly where I was going until I found myself pulling into the lot of a strip mall near Congress and 7th. CVS sat at the end of the row. I parked facing away from the storefront, the fading sun casting long shadows across the dashboard. I needed a place that wasn't mine. I pulled out my phone and began organizing documents into folders. Proof of income, property ownership records, a timeline of joint expenses and shared purchases. I labeled each one cleanly, precisely. Then the notification came, a DM on LinkedIn, of all places. Hey Jacintha, I know it's been years, but I think you need to know something. The name hit me like a glass of cold water. Harper Vexley. We'd been in the same section at law school. She'd always been brilliant, quiet, observant. We weren't close, but I trusted her instincts even then. Her next message followed within seconds. I can't say much over chat, but I consult part-time for a firm in Wilmington. Your husband has been moving money. Delaware LLC. It's structured to dissolve quickly. You should check the filings. I stared at the message, feeling my heartbeat shift into something new. Certainty. This wasn't a marriage falling apart. It was a dismantling. Quiet. Legal. Calculated. And now, someone outside the walls of our home had confirmed it. I didn't reply to Harper, not right away. I didn't need to. Instead, I dialed Faye's office. Her assistant answered, "Hi, it's Jacintha Greaves. Tell Faye I'm ready to file a formal inquiry on financial concealment. I'll send the documents tonight." The assistant didn't ask questions. She just said, "Got it. She'll prep the packet." I hung up, then leaned back in my seat. In the space of 2 days, I had gone from suspicious wife to active witness, from waiting for the blow to preparing the defense. Declan was right about one thing. The timing was perfect, but not for him. The next morning started like it had so many times before. Coffee, quiet, and a little sunlight cutting through the blinds. But under all that routine, I knew what had to be done. After double-checking the files I sent to Faye the night before, I packed a manila folder with supporting documents, income verification, statements, screenshots. I tucked it into my bag and left the house without saying a word. Declan was at the gym, like clockwork. He always went around 8. Same playlist, same routine, same sense of invincibility. The bank branch I chose wasn't the one closest to home. It was one we rarely used, tucked between a dry cleaner and a dentist's office off Lamar. The parking lot was half empty. I liked that. Less chance of someone noticing something they weren't meant to. Inside, the walls smelled faintly of lemon polish and old carpet. The man at the front desk asked how he could help. I told him I needed a private meeting with someone from account services. Nothing urgent, just something that needed a little discretion. Within 15 minutes, I was seated across from a woman named Carmen. Her blazer was a little too large for her frame, but her voice was steady, and she listened like someone who'd seen worse. "I need to transfer all funds from this joint account," I said, handing over the folder, "into this trust account. All of it. Today." She reviewed the documents, scanning through names, dates, authorizations. I watched her eyes flick across each page, occasionally glancing up at me like she was trying to gauge how much I knew. "Do you have the original trust paperwork?" I slid it across the desk. "Pages are signed and notarized. You'll see the stamp on the third sheet." Carmen nodded slowly. "All right. Everything looks legitimate." She paused just a second too long. "Can I ask, has the other party been notified of this move?" I met her eyes. "Not yet, but he will be, eventually." The rest happened quickly. Wire authorizations, closing forms, confirmation emails. I didn't flinch once. I wasn't worried about getting caught. I was too far past that. When she handed me the final printout, she hesitated. "Are you okay?" I smiled, soft but deliberate. "Now I am." I walked out of that office $30,000 lighter on paper, but I'd never felt more in control. Back at home, I let the silence wrap around me. I didn't play music. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat, waiting. At 6:12 p.m., the knock came. 3 short taps. Not rushed, not hesitant. I opened the door to a man in a navy jacket holding a slim envelope. "Mrs. Greaves?" "Yes." He handed it to me. "You've been served. Have a good evening." I took it without a word. Closed the door, turned the deadbolt. Inside, I sat on the couch and opened the envelope. I expected some grand gesture, an apology wrapped in legalese, or at least something resembling decency. What I got was a clean, overly formal petition for divorce. Structured paragraphs, legal boilerplate, a neat list of assets, each item followed by a percentage Declan believed he was entitled to. He had even broken down our accounts line by line. Joint savings, $84,200. I laughed. Not loudly, just a sharp exhale. That account, as of 6 hours ago, had exactly $27.44 in it. The rest had been legally moved, with receipts and timestamps to prove it. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo of the page, and texted it to Faye. Caption: "Filed after, we're clear." She replied instantly. "Perfect. Let him come after what doesn't exist." For the rest of the evening, I didn't read the petition again. I didn't call anyone. I poured myself a glass of water, took off my shoes, and folded laundry like nothing had changed. But everything had. This wasn't a story about being blindsided anymore. This was the part where the person you underestimated quietly takes control of the narrative. He thought he had outpaced me. He thought he moved first. He forgot I was raised to see silence not as surrender, but as setup. 5 days later, I walked into the courthouse like someone showing up to settle a quiet business dispute. Calm on the outside, layered armor underneath. The mediation room smelled of polished wood and recycled air, the kind of space built for civil conversations that begin with pleasantries and end with settlements disguised as victories. Declan was already seated when I arrived, dressed in a light gray suit he only wore to impress people he hoped to intimidate. He didn't look at me when I entered, didn't smile. He was pretending this was just another transaction. I wasn't playing that part anymore. Faye sat beside me, composed, a folder in her lap. Across from us, Declan's lawyer, a man named Rick Ford, had his arms crossed, leaning back like this was already in the bag. It wasn't. Rick started the meeting by listing off expected assets. He spoke with the confidence of someone who thought the opponent didn't read beyond page 2 of a contract. His voice was steady, his tone casual, like this was inevitable. We'll be requesting 50% of the joint savings, plus an equal division of retirement accounts and business holdings based on pre-2017 contributions. Faye waited. She didn't blink. Anything else? She asked politely, flipping open our file. Yes, Rick continued. Since Mrs. Greaves hasn't contested the petition, we're also seeking ownership of the condo. It's been Declan's primary residence. That's not accurate, Faye cut in, still sounding pleasant. The condo is a marital asset, but more importantly, the accounts you're referring to have already been lawfully moved, 3 weeks before your client filed. She placed a packet in the center of the table, neatly bound, stamped, time-coded. Rick looked up, confused. Excuse me? Declan shifted, his expression hardening. Faye didn't flinch. My client executed a full transfer of her legally entitled share of marital funds into a protected trust, all within the bounds of Texas community property law. She acted before your client filed, which means there's nothing for him to claim from those accounts. Silence. Long enough to feel like something cracked. Declan's jaw tightened. I saw it then. The first flicker of awareness that he was behind. Not ahead, not in control. Rick flipped through the pages, skimming the stamps. These were filed on April 8th? Correct. That was weeks before. Yes, Faye said gently. It was. Across the table, Declan's fingers curled into his palm. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His face said enough. But that wasn't the only surprise we brought. Inez Calderon entered the room 10 minutes later, crisp blouse, tablet in hand. A forensic accountant Faye had worked with on other cases. Quiet, exacting, brilliant. Rick looked confused. Who is this? Faye didn't even look up. Our financial verification expert. She reviewed your client's asset disclosures. We had some concerns. Inez tapped her screen. The account listed under Independent Holdings, account ending in 9413, didn't exist on the date of filing. It was opened 2 weeks later and backdated internally to avoid scrutiny. That's illegal. Declan finally broke his silence. That's not true, he said flatly. That account was created in March. Inez didn't blink. No, it wasn't. She slid a printed copy of the bank metadata across the table. I verified directly with the institution. Timestamp logs are immutable. Whoever helped you file those numbers either didn't check or assumed no one would. Rick pulled the documents toward him, frowning. The mediator, a woman in her 60s, with a look that said she'd seen this dance too many times, leaned forward. We'll need a recess, Rick muttered. Faye gave a courteous nod. Of course. As we stepped into the hallway, Declan followed a few steps behind. When he caught up, he leaned in, voice low but tight. You really think this makes you the winner? I turned to him calmly. I think it makes me someone you'll stop underestimating. He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're making this uglier than it needs to be. That word, ugly, almost made me laugh. As if what he'd done was clean. As if financial manipulation, hidden accounts, and silent erasure were somehow gentlemanly. I didn't respond. Not because I was afraid, but because nothing I could say would teach him what the consequences already had. Back inside, the room was colder. Rick was quieter. Declan had gone pale. The rest of the session moved slowly. They asked for time to review. Faye agreed. We didn't rush. When it ended, no one smiled. No handshakes, no goodbyes. Just me walking out of the courthouse, shoulders straight, head clear. That was the day the mask slipped. Not just for him, but for me too. Because for the first time, the people in the room didn't see me as someone fragile or passive. They saw me as the one who'd already planned for this moment, while everyone else was still writing the opening argument. The morning after mediation, I woke up to an email from Faye. The subject line read, "Settlement proposal attached." I didn't open it right away. I got dressed first, slowly. I made coffee, wiped down the kitchen counter, and watched a squirrel dart along the back fence, completely unaware of what it meant to be cornered. When I finally opened the email, the attachment was as expected. Polished, careful, full of assumptions. Declan's team was offering what they called a reasonable and amicable resolution, 30% of assets, a non-disparagement clause, an NDA covering the events of the past 6 months, financially, legally, and personally. In exchange, no lawsuits, no further public action. It was wrapped in corporate speak to avoid unnecessary emotional distress and protracted legal expense. I sat at the dining table and read the last page 3 times. Then I closed my laptop, walked to the sliding door, and stepped out onto the porch. The sun was just high enough to sting the corner of my eyes. I stood there, letting it hit my face, steadying myself in the stillness. This wasn't peace. It was hush money. Declan didn't want resolution. He wanted quiet, clean hands. A way to say, she agreed, so that the version of the story he'd already started selling wouldn't unravel. But I hadn't come this far to be edited out with polite signatures and legal courtesy. I walked back inside, reopened the email, and typed 2 words. We decline. I hit send, then texted Faye. Sent the response. Let's finish this the right way. She replied immediately. See you Friday. Courtroom 3C. We have the floor. The week passed with a strange sense of calm. Declan didn't call. Didn't show up unannounced. His silence wasn't respectful. It was strategic. He was waiting to see if I'd fold. He was about to be disappointed. Friday came, and the courtroom was as sterile as every other legal space I'd stepped into these past few months. Neutral walls, stiff chairs, and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look exhausted. We didn't speak before it started. He avoided my eyes. I didn't offer him a single glance. The hearing moved quickly. Faye summarized our position with precision. No dramatics, just facts. When the judge asked if I had anything to add before finalizing the motion, I stood up. It wasn't planned. Faye looked at me, surprised but trusting. I stepped forward. I'm not here for revenge, I began, my voice steady. And I'm not asking for more than what's right. But I do want the record to reflect something that's not in the financials or filings. The judge nodded. Go ahead, Ms. Greaves. I let the silence hang long enough for everyone to look at me, especially Declan. Next time you want to erase a woman quietly, I said, pausing just enough, try someone who hasn't already learned how to disappear. The room went still. Even the clerk stopped typing. I turned and walked back to my seat. No one said a word. The judge cleared her throat, gave a firm nod, and brought the gavel down. Motion approved. Just like that, it was over. No fireworks, no dramatic exits. Just the sound of legal closure and Declan not looking up as I passed him in the aisle. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I didn't even turn on the radio. The only sound was the hum of tires and the wind pushing against the windows. When I pulled into the driveway, I parked and stayed seated for a while. The house looked different now. Still mine, but not the same. And maybe that was the point. I went inside, changed out of my courtroom dress, and put a kettle on. While the water boiled, I opened a blank document on my laptop. I titled it, What No One Tells You About Leaving Quietly. I didn't write anything yet. I just stared at the blinking cursor. Because sometimes, winning doesn't feel like celebration. Sometimes it feels like a deep breath after holding it for too long. And sometimes the loudest thing you can do is walk away, while they're still waiting for you to break. 2 weeks passed, though I stopped counting after the first few days. It was easier that way. Easier to let the structure of a new life settle in without constantly looking at the clock like something was supposed to return. The apartment was smaller than the house. Just 2 bedrooms, open kitchen, tall windows that made the afternoon light spill in like it was trying to say, "This is yours now." The balcony overlooked part of downtown, just far enough from the noise, but close enough to see movement, to know life kept going. I stood there now, barefoot, a mug of tea in my hands as the wind tugged gently at my sleeves. Boxes sat stacked in the corner behind me, not untouched, but opened halfway. Not because I was stalling, but because I wanted each thing I placed on a shelf to matter, to feel chosen. I didn't want to carry the past into the future like clutter. I'd done enough of that already. My phone buzzed on the table behind me. I walked inside, picked it up, and saw a message from Faye. Final paperwork has been stamped and filed. You're officially done. Just like that. No parade, no champagne, no one waiting outside to tell me congratulations. Just a soft ding, a text, and a woman in her 40s standing in a space she paid for, finally alone. I poured the last of my tea into the sink and rinsed the mug. I didn't cry. I wasn't sad, not exactly. There was an ache, but it wasn't grief, it was release, like when your shoulders finally drop after carrying something for too long. I sat on the edge of the couch, picked up my laptop, and opened the file I had created after the court hearing. What I wish I knew before I stayed too long. I stared at the blinking cursor again. This time, I started typing. Not a memoir, not a tell-all, just lessons, quiet truths. A list of things women don't say out loud, because we're taught that survival is supposed to be silent. That if you handled it with grace, it meant you didn't suffer. I wrote the first line. You can be smart, capable, loving, and still be lied to. Then the second. And that doesn't make you foolish, it makes you human. Outside, a car horn echoed faintly below, followed by a child's laughter somewhere in the distance. I paused, listened, and for the first time in a while, didn't brace for anything to fall apart. I thought about Declan, where he might be now. If he was sitting in some office pretending none of this had touched him. If he was back in our old house, walking through rooms he once tried to claim with legal jargon and empty charm. I didn't hate him, not anymore. He had built a version of himself that couldn't bear the weight of being truly seen, and when I saw him anyway, he folded. He didn't lose in court. He lost long before that, when he believed being loud made him right, and that my silence meant surrender. Rumors had started, not because I opened my mouth, but because people notice. His colleagues, our mutual acquaintances, they'd started piecing it together. Quietly, Declan didn't face prison, or handcuffs, or headlines. Just something worse for a man like him. The slow erosion of credibility. And I didn't need to watch it happen. I texted Harper. Thank you, I'm good now, really. She responded with a simple heart emoji. No words, no questions. That was enough. I logged out of my email and shut the laptop. Later that evening, as the light faded into something softer, I pulled a small frame from one of the boxes. It held a photo from a trip to Santa Fe. Just me, from a time before Declan, sitting on a stone wall, laughing at something the camera didn't catch. I placed it on the bookshelf, dead center. Not because I missed the person I was, but because I wanted to remember she still existed. I've stopped measuring my worth in how well I endure. I don't need my story to be impressive, just honest. This wasn't a revenge arc, it was reclamation. Not every story ends with a standing ovation. Some just end with peace. A quiet apartment, a clean start. And maybe that's the real victory. I used to think silence was something passive, that if you didn't scream, if you didn't make a scene, you were weak, an easy target. But now I know better. Silence, when chosen, is a form of strength. It's where clarity begins. It's where self-respect speaks the loudest. What I went through wasn't just about a failed marriage. It was about remembering that I was never meant to be erased from my own life. It was about reclaiming my voice, quietly, deliberately, and on my own terms. If you're watching this and you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or pushed out of something you helped build, let me tell you this. You are not invisible. You are not crazy. And you are never too late to take your power back. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a therapist. I'm just someone who finally stopped hoping he would change and started believing that I could. What about you? Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like someone was writing you out of your own story? What did you do? Or maybe, what do you wish you had done differently? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. If this video hit home for you, press 1 in the comments or tell me how you connected with it. And if it didn't resonate, that's okay too. Tell me why. This is a space for honesty, not perfection. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and deeply human, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on that bell icon so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for being here. And remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight back, it's to walk away without ever looking over your shoulder.